Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and joining us today is an author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is a poet, photographer, and art historian. She received her BA in art history from the University of Mary Washington in 2002, and in 2014, she earned an MA in art history at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Her prose, poetry, and photography have been published in various anthologies, magazines, and online platforms. And she is also the author of 3 travel memoirs, Mosaic, I Once Was a Pilgrim, and There Will Come Soft Rains. She currently lives in New York, but her dreams always take her to France. And in today's interview, we'll be talking on her most recent publication, There Will Come Soft Rains. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, poet, photographer, author, and art historian, Briana Gervat. Briana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome, Briana. Now, before we go any forward, viewers and listeners, in case you're wondering, there was a slight technical issue. That is why Briana's name is not showing. In case you are wondering that in the comments, that is the reason why. Technical issues always there and there. But besides the point, Briana, I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your story. And I had a chance to read a little bit about it, a brief description about it. But before we go into it, is there anything you would like to add about your background?
There's so much, but also because I've written 3 travel books, but this one, I'm a historian at heart. And so that informs so much of what I do and how I see the world and everything else like that. So like when the opportunity to walk the Western Front came along, I was like, I'm going to make something of it. And it was just still, especially a century later, I just felt like it was such an important thing to do, such an important experience to have and to reflect on, and how much the Great War impacted the century that followed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those just learning about your books, what can you tell us about your travel memoir about the Western Front?
Well, it just encapsulates 500 miles that I walked across the Western Front. It was just after COVID, so the world was opening up.
Mhm.
So I had a backpack, and I got myself a tent and a sleeping bag, and I had my hiking boots, and I just set out into the wilderness to walk the journey along the Western Front. I had been to like other places that were very profound. Um, Geographical places of World War I, like Sarajevo
Mm.
and Gallipoli, and because it was such a huge war. And I love France, so for me, the opportunity to go to France was just so. It just made sense. It was just almost like another step in the journey.
Nice, nice. And it's actually really, really cool to travel along the Western Front because I imagine, as we'll probably talk later in the interview, it must have been a very profound and like the word I remember my teacher using, numinous moment that you can't explain it, but just walking along the fields, the roads that was the Western Front 100 something years ago is absolutely insane.
Yes. I think that especially revisiting it a century later, you read stories about what it was like for people to return to the Western Front or be on the Western Front during the war, but it was like, I think your teacher was so correct when he said that it was numinous. There's no way to describe it. So like, to set out, you have an idea of what you're going to encounter. You have an idea of what happened, but when you see the depth and the scope of how large the Western Front actually is, it's incomprehensible.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we dive into the construction of this story, let's talk a little bit more about you, Briana. So from your bio, you received a BA in art history and an MA in art history. So is it safe to say that history has always been a passion of yours to pursue?
Oh, absolutely. I think that from the very young age, especially art, that it was just history always called to me. I mean, I love science and I love art. Like, obviously I love art because I'm an art historian,
Mhm.
but history to me is just, it's a story. It's a story, and it's a similar story, but it's a different story. And you're able to follow the vein of humanity through it.
Absolutely. Now, what would you consider to be your definitive aha moment that really pushed you to go into the direction of poetry and writing prose?
I think that it comes from like I'm second and third generation immigrant. So my
Mhm.
parents, my father's mother came over from Poland right before World War II.
Okay.
And then my grandparents, their parents came over before the war, after World War I, but like they came over from Italy. So I have my Polish grandmother on my father's side and my Italian grandparents on my mother's side. And I just think listening to their stories, listening to the fact that they had this life and they lived through the depression and they lived through these wars, it was just this moment that you're like, you listen to them and you're like, oh my god, like this happens, people experience this,
Right.
and then they share it, and then how do you really share it, because it's so heavy and so deep and so meaningful.
Mm, very
So
true.
yeah, so listening to their stories growing up, I think that it just had such an impact on the way I saw the world.
Nice. And then going back to your memoir regarding the Western Front, as you mentioned earlier, once COVID was loosening up and you were able to travel, what really sparked that drive to not only walk through the fields of history, but to also document and write about it? What was that deciding factor?
I think that, like a lot of it, like you said, like once the restrictions were loosening up, I needed to loosen up. I needed to, like, I love being out in nature. I love walking in the woods. So like when someone was like, "Hey, there's a 500-mile walk in the woods," I'm like, "Yes." And I've done caminos before, and I've done kind of pilgrimages like that. So for me, it was like it was a no-brainer on that. But I think that like walking like the Western Front, I mean, I just love France. And France was one of the first countries that like was really opening up more than other countries. They had been looser like in opening up their restrictions, as opposed to going to like an Asian country, or even Australia or something. So I was like, it was like almost like, oh my god, I can go there and I don't have to, so it was
Right.
it was it was it was like a meeting of fates, that not only was the world opening up, but that France was the most viable option.
Right. Okay. So now let's dive into the overall construction of this story. So, as mentioned in your bio, that you have written one of three, or I should say three, travel memoirs documenting your travels, your journeys, and your most recent one documenting the Western Front. So, after experiencing that yourself, when writing it, did you have like a clear outline of what you want to write about, or do you consider yourself to be a spontaneous writer?
Oh no, I am not a spontaneous writer. I mean, there's certain times like poetry is more spontaneous for me, but like
Mhm.
when it comes to actually writing, I mean, you're a writer, So it's hard work. It's not
Yes.
just, you don't just sit there and like, oh my God, like you like when I hear people that just sit and write like a book for a month or something, I'm like, what really? How do they do that?
Mhm. That's
So
true.
yeah. So for me, my writing is, especially when I'm writing about when I wrote about the Western Front, it's not like I can sit there and like I can't make stuff up. There's so like, it's disrespectful,
Yes.
and two, I think that a lot of it was, like I said before, I wanted to get out there into the world again, and then I wanted to do it justice, because I feel like, despite the fact that we have so much information in our hands and we have access to all of history, really, and like,
Yes.
and like our the ancients would be so jealous of us that we don't even have to travel to do that. We don't have to go to Alexandria, and
Mm.
we get to go to our phones. And a lot of people, I think I was a little lost, because people were like, oh my god, this is the first time in history that something this terrible has ever happened. And I'm like, that's not true.
Nope.
So I think that it was one of those, not that you can't find comfort in the Great War. You can't find comfort in any war, because that's crazy.
Right.
But also to know that we weren't alone, that we weren't
Mm.
alone in our suffering or sadness or our sorrow, and
Right.
that it's the story of humanity. And it in a way, it sounds so like not uplifting, but then you go to walk through France and it's like the balance between the two. It's the dichotomy of life.
Absolutely. And I think when you examine the Great War in itself, I think it was the first war that truly broke the myth of it being like a glorious thing. I mean, we've had war before up to that point, and the Civil War was the first war to really document, from the pictures. But even from the pictures, we still have the artist representations of these glorious battlefields of men fighting valiantly and propelling the myth that war is this very, I don't want to say beautiful, but glorious thing that happens in history. And the Great War really just destroyed that it is gritty, it is violent, there's no honor in it. It is just very, very disgusting. And there are winners and losers in history when it comes to war. And the Great War really, really showed that. So I imagine walking through it, did you by chance travel along where some of like the famous battles were when you were traveling, like the Battle of the Somme by chance, like where the Somme took place?
Oh yeah, no, I walked from the Vosges Mountains, which in the south of France. If you have France right here, you
Mhm.
have Switzerland that juts over here. So the Vosges are like right around, like right where France and Switzerland meet. So I started there and then I just walked north. So like they had the Battle of the Vosges,
Yes.
when the war first started, and then it moved up, and then it moved up to the Marne and Verdun.
Mhm.
So I walked through those places. So I walked through the Verdun first, which was the big, big battlefield.
Yes.
And then as I progressed up, then I went through the Marne, and then afterwards I went into the Somme, and then the Ypres salient and everything. So like I walked through all of the major battlefields. So I do point it out one time, like multiple times in my book. It's like, how could this be the same war? Like how could this be where they're fighting along this huge line and nothing's happening except they're just getting killed and killing one another?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And going back to the book again, so once you had a clear outline of what you want to write about, what was sort of your ritual or routine that kept you disciplined and centered to make sure that you not only finished writing your story, but you got it finished to the point that you knew the next steps after?
Well, I think that like my other books really helped me writing, it's always, and also like going to school and writing papers. It's like, okay, it's like an extrapolated paper. I know that's a horrible way to like compare it because a book and a paper are two totally different things.
Right,
But I think that like I played sports my whole life, so I think the discipline came from like having a dream, having a goal, and being like, I have to see this through because I've told people about
right.
it. I told people I was going to write a book, so it's like I can't just be like, I'm kind of writing it. It's like, no, I'm like actually writing it.
Very true. I understand the mentality very, very well. And also, once you had a clear idea of your story and you were in the zone, what was sort of your goal going into this project as the author, but also the promise you're making to not only yourself, but your established readers from your previous books and your new readers who are just going to pick up possibly this book as their very first?
That's a great question. I think that the promise. I think that just knowing, like having that end in sight and knowing that the story, like, because I'm not like one of those like, oh my God, I'm the writer meant to be writing this. I just think that like, anybody can sit there and say, I want to walk the Western Front and I want to write about it. But it was just the idea that like, I've always wanted to share history. I'm always one of those people, like when I post
Mhm.
something, I'm like, ooh, I learned this. I want to share it with you. And so for me, like, I think that just the multiple layers of the Western Front or the Great War, like knowing that I'm peeling them away and then adding my story to it and then weaving it all together. I just feel like that's what I want. I didn't Not that I wanted to make the Great War accessible because it's not. You can't imagine watching everyone in your life be affected by it.
Right.
The closest that we have like in my generation is maybe September 11th.
Yes.
or and even like the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, like you kind of can do it, but also we're distanced from it. So it was the idea of like, how do you share that heartbreak in a way that, like you said, my previous readers expect what they have always read from me, and my new readers are like, okay, I never thought about it like this, but I'm happy to think about it, and I want to think about it, and it makes me think.
Very true. Very true. And there are going to be, I should have mentioned this earlier, Brianna, but there's going to be a few fan questions sprinkled throughout this interview, a little change of pace. And the
Okay.
first fan question comes from one of my viewers who asks, from your travels along the Western Front, what was your favorite scene or moment to write about in your memoir?
Oh, okay. There's two, and they're both the same. My favorite scenes were when I went to. That's a great question. Thank you. Tell your audience that was. I love that question. There were two. So it's the Cathedral at Reims and the Cathedral at Amiens.
Okay.
And so during the Great War, the Cathedral at Reims was destroyed in the First Battle of the Marne,
Mm,
and then the people of Reims had they were under constant bombardment from the beginning to the end. So when the cathedral was used, it was like the biggest building in all of that region. So it was like obviously the direct like it was like where people wanted to hit. So like the French and the Allied powers were able to use that cathedral, like the destruction of the cathedral, as like a way to be like, look how barbaric the Boches are, look how horrible the Germans are, look what they've done to our history.
mm,
And so going there and watching it being rebuilt and just standing in front of this incredibly beautiful cathedral, it brought a sense of peace and calm. And the same with Amiens, that you go to these places and you just look at them and you're like, these are majestic. And
mm.
not that it would never detract from the war. It can never make the war okay. But to stand in front of them and to find that peace was just, I loved writing about it because that peace was what I sought as well.
Nice. Okay. All right. And that actually gets segue to the follow-up fan question, also from the same viewer, who asked, what was the most challenging part to write in your memoir?
Oh gosh, like all of it really, because there's so much information. The battles were, you can sit there and say, oh, the battles were, 2 days or 3 days, or they were like Verdun and they were
Mhm.
almost a year long. And then you had all these tremendous amount of losses. So like, you like, for me, I didn't want to concentrate on the leaders. I didn't want to sit there and say that Ferdinand Foch and, Georges Clemenceau and even like Lloyd George or anybody were like, I didn't want to concentrate on them. I wanted to concentrate on the fact that you had all these millions of men that went to the front and all these millions of men that lost their lives. And I wanted not, you can't do them justice.
Right.
You can't sit there and like you said in the beginning, like your teacher said, and you repeated, or you echoed, that you can't sit there and be like, okay, they in a lot of ways they did die for naught.
Mm,
So how do you include that sorrow? How do you convey that it was one of the worst catastrophes in human history?
hmm
And how do you do it in a way that doesn't make people stop reading and want to put it down because it's too much?
Absolutely. Very true. And also that goes to another fan question, which brace yourself again. This is probably the most interesting but also unique fan question I've ever gotten for any interview. So I'm going to make sure I get it all.
Okay.
And this is from a different viewer, but they ask, I've been a big follower of World War One and World War Two history. I've read a lot of books on both great wars, and I had the opportunity to look into this book. I'm very curious. Number one, as an historian, how do you feel that this book helps contribute to the scholarship of World War One? And secondly, how did you make sure that your book was very different from other stories that have talked about the Great War?
Great questions. I like both of them. So the first one, having to do with including like everything, right?
Mhm.
Um, how did it was uh, sorry, I got I conflated the two questions. All right, so the first one is that like how is my book, like how do I include myself in the historical thing of that, or sets it apart?
Yeah.
I think that being like having an historical background was allowed me to view, like, I was never in the military. I was never
Mhm.
I had friends that served in the army and the navy and everything else like that, but like always was anti-war. So like for me, I think that what was different for me was being able to approach it in an art historical manner,
Mhm.
and to see it through the eyes of the artists and the poets. And not that people haven't written books about that. People always, there are tremendous volumes and biographies and autobiographies of people that were poets and write and artists during the war. But I think that like having a modern take on it, to be like, okay, look what happened and look what's become, and
Mhm.
to be able to not bridge that, because you can't, like, people always say that World War One was so far back in history that it is hard to really, like, you watch there are more movies about World War Two, there's more
Yes.
stories, so people don't really see World War One as similar or even more tragic than World War Two.
Right.
So I think that wanting to up that door, open up that window, open up your heart to say no, like let's acknowledge this. Let's focus on this, and
Yeah.
let's tell a story that is the second, going to the second question, how is it different? There have been many books. There have been many people that have walked the Western Front before. Stephen Frost, there's a man named Stephen, I forget his last name, but he wrote a beautiful book about it. He walked in the 80s and then
Oh,
was,
Stephen Fry?
yes, this is Stephen Fry, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think so.
And then you have Sir Anthony Selden, who was a British historian, and he walked it in like right before May. And like, so like, how is it different? I think that a female perspective, like, I don't want to sit there and be like, oh my gosh, like as a woman, I bring a different, but I think that, there's a softness there that's not necessarily there when it comes to men writing about World War One, because you do want to say that it was for something, that they fought, and that it was this tremendous war, that they were fighting for freedom or democracy, but at the end of the day it was just a bunch of egomaniacal people that wanted to their own imperial conquests and their own ego stroked.
Mhm.
So
That
I
is
think
very
that,
true.
what's that?
I said that is 100% very true.
Yeah, so I think that what makes mine different is, again, I don't concentrate on the leaders of the war. Maybe I mention Lord Grey, and I mention George Clemenceau, and I mention some German generals and everything, and obviously I talk about the Archduke, but I don't sit there and say, oh my gosh, look at these great men, look what they've done. It's more, look at these young men live through. Let's look at it from the people's perspective instead of the powers that be. So I hope
Yeah.
that I did that. I hope that as I wrote the book that I separated myself because of my art historical perspective, and also my desire to find poetry in the madness.
Yes, very true. And I also think I've dabbled a little bit into art history. I took not necessarily an art history class, but something that was along the lines. And if you look at art history, if I remember correctly from what my teacher said, we looked at the Northern Renaissance in France and specifically Germany. Art history is more so about what was the reasons behind the creations of these incredible pieces of work. And I think that mentality applies very perfectly to the study of World War One, because it's not just the battles, it's not just the people. It's why were these battlegrounds so significant to the overall study? What about them has you know encapsulated the mind of historians and studiers of the Great War for decades and decades. And going back to what you said in the beginning when you began this journey, you mentioned that you didn't want to say, "Oh, I'm just writing about this." You made the decision to actively write and tell the story from beginning to end. And as a writer, I have talked to a lot of guests about this particular question when it comes to sharing one's work. And there is some hesitancy because you don't know what the reaction is going to be like, or if they're going to be open minded to the discussion, and so forth. And some guests I have had on the show have had differing answers. Some have said they told their family from the get go what they were working on. Others have said they told them at the very end when the book was going to be published. For you, Briana, when did you tell your friends and family that you were embarking on this new book journey of yours?
I think that it would went without saying for like my friends, my family who have known me my whole life. They're like, okay, she's probably gonna write another book about this, you know? But I think that like you said, like there are people that have hesitancy. There are writers that are like, okay, I'm not gonna say anything until I actually get it finished. And like as a writer, there's some people that are like, oh my God, I want to read it. And they're genuinely interested and they want to read it. And then there's people that say they're gonna read it and they're not necessarily that's never gonna happen. So
Right,
I think that it's knowing fleshing that out, like who you can share that with and who's going to encourage you, and other people that you're like, so tell me about your life, you know what I mean? I think that
right,
there's that balance, like but I think that as it got closer, and for me launching my book, I launched it on the day that World War I started throughout all of Europe.
right,
So I think building that up, I think it was more towards the end, because in the middle, people still, not that, like, I never had doubts that I was going to finish it. I mean, there were some days that I was like, okay, maybe I should just give up and write terrible books that will sell millions of copies.
mm,
But towards the end, it was, you know, focusing on it. And then everybody got on board because everybody's like, oh, she actually did it.
yes, absolutely. That's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. And overall, what has been the general reaction like from readers? Positive, very critical, or somewhere down the middle?
Honestly, like I am so humbled and grateful, because I've received, I mean, I have really nice friends though. I have loving family. I'm very lucky in my life, and I really am so blessed. But even strangers, like I've gotten some very lovely reviews. I've had people that are just like, I just can't stop thinking about this book. And I'm like, great, because I haven't stopped thinking about World War I either. So like we're in the same boat. And I think that, like, so mostly very positive. And then the ones on the other side, like, so there was not a lot of water along the Western Front. Like there was not a lot of towns that I can stop in and get like
Right.
supplies and everything. So there's a man that owns a hotel in the Argonne, and he's like, I'm so disappointed that you didn't, like, you didn't spend more time there. I was like, I was thirsty. Like, I'm sorry.
Man. Well, that happens. That's happened, but that's amazing. That's amazing that you've had this very, very positive experience and reception of this book on the Western Front. And this kind of goes into a few reflective questions. But before we get to that, there was another fan question which I did want to ask you, and that is, of course, how did you create the atmosphere of the book? I imagine you didn't want to be very historically jargon dumped as like an academic book. You wanted to have some kind of presence and atmosphere, so to speak. So how did you create the atmosphere for your book to where it's a blend of the two?
That's an awesome question. I really think that's a good, because I think that as writers, we do want an atmosphere. We want to get people interested or
Yeah.
fascinated or geared up to be like, no, I really want to get this book. I want to read it. I want to share it and everything. So, as I wrote the book, I would share certain histories for the last 3 years. But
Mm,
then starting on June 28th of this year, this past summer, I started with more memorable or profound events of World War I. So, like on
mm,
June 28th, that's when the Archduke was assassinated. So that's when I launched the book is coming.
right.
And then I spent the next 37 days just posting about different facets of the war. So there's certain parts of the war that people might not know about, like that fact that Winnie the Pooh was written by a former soldier
Mm-hmm.
that had fought in the war and brought his young child to a zoo where Winnie the Pooh was.
Yes.
So I told those kinds of stories, and then I bartend. So I made cocktails that were surrounding the war. So the French 75. There's a drink called the Matahari, the sidecar, even like a mimosa. So I got people like, oh, I didn't know that that was another aspect of the war. That
Right.
there was that from the cataclysm there was creation as well. And yeah, so I like to think that I got people wanting to seek the depths of the war, not just the dates, then not just be like, hey, August 1914 to November 1918.
Hmm.
I wanted people to be like, oh, I didn't know that Joseph Pilates was in a prison of war camp, and that's why we have Pilates.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
actually where you get the name from.
No, but well, Joseph Pilates was a real German man, and he was in an intern. He was interned in a prison of war camp in the Isle of Man.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and then he brought Pilates to the world.
Fascinating. I did not
Yeah.
know that. That is really, really incredible. And this kind of goes into the reflective questions, the first of which is a big one. And that is, of course, what does it mean to be an author and an historian in the digital age? Because for the author side, the industry has changed over the last 20 years. And for historians, the field has changed within the last 20 years. A lot of historians and authors, a mix of both, have found social media to be a huge boost in their profiles and their credibility and so forth. However, as I'm sure you can definitely agree, Brianna, that social media is a double-edged sword. You allow yourself to be exposed for the positives, but you also leave yourselves open for the negatives. And a lot of guests I've had on the show have talked about that. And of course, another big thing about social media is that it heightened, unfortunately, the imposter syndrome and the anxiety. And going back to your background as an art historian, I don't know if someone's ever said this, but I can imagine there was a thought in the back of your mind of someone saying, how could she, as an art historian, write about World War One? That is not her area of expertise. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Don't know if someone has actually said that, but I imagine there was probably maybe that crumb in the back of your mind. So ultimately, with that being said, what has still disciplined you to continue going forward, recognizing that those elements are going to exist and persist as you continue down this venture?
That is a very reflective question, because I mean, I think that, like you said, it's been changing for 20 years. It's just, and social
Mhm.
media has, for some has been a boon, and for some people, like for me, I actually don't like social media as much as I post, as much as I share, as much as I want to get people like and I've made some really good friends on social media too. So like I can't
Yes.
knock it entirely, because I appreciate it for, the value that is brought to my life. But I think that also, like, when I decided to be an art historian, when I decided to major in art history in college, I mean, like, everybody I talked to was like, what are you gonna do with an art history degree? And so for me, it was always like, the answer was always, well, I'm going to write. Like, I want to be a writer. Like, there's no other thing that I want to do besides be a
Right.
writer. So I think that, like, I think what you're saying is that, like, what would give a art historian the right to write about World War I? I think that if you really look at art, if you look at what was being created until that moment, you had such beauty. You had such like, yeah, you had impressionism, you had the Belle Epoque, you had things changing, you had,
Right.
cubism coming around and everything. But then I just feel like there was, like, World War I happened, and the tie was cut, and everything that was beautiful before that stop being beautiful in a way.
Yes.
And so yeah, I just wanted to relay the fact that, like, something was lost. So I think that as an art historian and as an author in the digital age, I went to the Met on Friday. I live in New York, so I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I just sat there and I was like, I'm gonna do this like every week and multiple times a week, because it's just the idea that we lost the tangibility. And I think that in creating a book, creating it, like, not a blog, not some a social media post, but like creating a book would bring us back to that tangibility of what can still be found.
Yes. Very true. Very, very true. And this goes into the next question, which we may have mentioned this before. I'm actually talked off camera a little bit about this. So, as I said off camera, I've been doing this show now for about 6, 7 years, and I've had the opportunity to meet so many authors and so many historians within those years, and I've come to the realization that the lockdown years have been seen arguably as a breeding ground for the new voices that have emerged in both fields and both industries, respectively. And once the restrictions did loosen up, it was a tidal wave. You had new voices entering the publishing industry. You had content creators who love history contributing to the history field. It's been an absolute flood. But as you know, time has settled, I've been able to look at things a little bit more clearly. And this has sparked a debate of whether or not, because of the new voices, we are in a golden age or an iron age. Some have argued that we're in a golden age because of these new voices, or a renaissance, but others have argued strongly that we're in an iron age because for iron is a little bit stronger than gold, as a more stronger foundation. And tying that to authors and historians, you've been able to weave through, who actually wants to contribute to both fields as opposed to who wants to get rich quick or just make mind-numbing content. And of course, iron is not as shiny as gold, but it still has its glimmer tying into the content that is created. So in your opinion, Briana, do you believe that we are in a golden age or renaissance, or are we transitioning more into an iron age / new age?
I think it's a fine line that we're walking. I think that we should be so grateful that we have such access to unlimited information.
Yes.
And then at the same time, like, you do a Google search and right away it's like AI and you get listed. So then you have this idea that, okay, I have this information and now I know everything. So I think that, like, you do have a lot of people that have flooded the market that contribute and everything, and like that's a beautiful thing. And I think that, like, those people during COVID, I think during the lockdowns and everything, you had people still searching. And so you have people that are raising their voices and everything, but I think it's easy to get lost in that too.
Mm.
So I think that, you have a full market, and then what's beautiful about history is that, like, there's so many different eras. So it's like you can find someone that's like, I'm a really good historian, and they focus on like Tudor age England, and then you have another historian that's like, no, 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 I love Egyptian, like all the Egyptian times. You know what I mean? So it's like there's enough pieces of the pie for everybody. But when I say there's a golden age, I don't know. I think that people want like a cookie cutter idea of what history is or what information is, and they want it to be perfectly packaged, and they want it to be like, and we should be celebrating the fact that people, like, I just feel like we kind of, there was this hope that that having all this access to information was going to make people like smarter and more aware. And
Mhm.
now I just feel like you almost like get lost in a sea of it. So would I say it's a golden age? I want to be hopeful. I want to believe that it's a golden age. I want to believe that things will get better. But also, as a historian, I'm like, it's just the way the world is.
Yes. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention the elephant in the room. And that is, of course, AI in both the publishing industry as well as the historical field. Because I have seen a lot in both. And it's one of those things, as I've been talking with guests more, my stance on AI has changed a little bit different. I do agree that it is a tool that can be beneficial, but if you're using AI to write content, whether it's fictitious, nonfiction, or historical, it does a disservice because it mass produces a false sense of creativity. And for you, Briana, I would like to hear your thoughts on this and how we could use AI as a tool, but recognize there are some things that only people can do to really show the human side in the case of this book. Because I honestly feel if a program wrote this, it would not evoke the same emotion.
No, absolutely. So I have to say I'm staunchly against AI. Like I miss using my brain to its full capacity, and I feel
Mhm.
like the little pocket computers that we hold in our hands kind of detract from that
Mhm.
more and more each day. I think that, like, in a general search, like if you're just looking for something and you just want like the most basic information, maybe AI is useful. But in the terms of the field of history and the field of writing, I just feel like it's a cop out. I
Right.
know somebody that's like, oh yeah, use AI to like ask, like someone's like, oh yeah, I asked ChatGPT for like their opinion. And I'm like, why can't you ask the person in front of you for their opinion? Like, we're gonna lose that connection to humanity. And I
Right.
think that AI is letting it slip through our hands. I talked to my friend who is an academic, like a lot of my friends that are academics, they have a huge problem with it because you have people that like don't even know how to use primary sources. They don't even know how to
Mhm.
seek out secondary sources. And then they're using AI to create their papers that they're submitting.
Oh yes.
And so it's like, well, what, like, if you're not able to, like, if you're not able to dissect something and use your brain, like, how are you actually going to say, I understand the world and I understand how it works and I know exactly what's going on? Like, that's arrogant and ignorant. And I think AI is allowing that to be ushered in, like a new age of being like, well, I don't have to think about those things. AI does it for me.
Yes, that is absolutely very true. Probably my favorite argument to use for people who say that AI is like the way forward in terms of like creating content. My counter to that is asking AI to create something for you. It's like asking an alcoholic seventh grader to do the work for you. Ultimately, you're going to end up being the editor. You're not the creative. You are absolutely the editor. And you're going to realize it's not going to be pretty. You're going to have to change everything. And you're going to reach the point where it's like, I could have written this better than the program. And then there's that whole reflective journey. But that could be a discussion in and of itself for a full episode.
Oh yeah, no,
But
absolutely.
but jumping from that, that does go into now the business side of being an author and being an historian. So, as some icebreakers, as well as fan questions that work together with this. So, for you, Brianna, what was the most shocking and probably challenging aspect of the publishing industry? And up to the creation of this current work, is there anything you would have done differently?
Um, yes. Okay, so the most shocking thing. Have you ever written a query letter?
Yes, a few
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. And then you have to know who the agent is you're addressing and what they published. You have to read those books and relate your book to what someone else is, right?
Yes, the query trenches. A lot of
Yeah.
friends have gone through those.
No, okay. So my question is that like the world is, we have 8 billion people in the world. So not only like you're querying somebody, and then the queries, they're like, oh, is this like, we don't take unsolicited queries, which is totally understandable. But then they're like, oh, we're not going to deign to give you a response. You have to sit there and wade through that person's entire career, but they won't respond to you even with a rejection.
Yes, absolutely. I've gone through that. As I mentioned before, I've had a lot of friends who have gone through the query trenches. It is a nightmare. Absolutely. I understand it, but it's just a nightmare, especially for independent authors, independent creators who want to reach that next step in their career.
Yeah. And then so the shocking part of it is, like, listen, people like what they like, and you can't fault them for that for the most part and everything. But like some of the stuff that gets published out there now, you're just like, why? Why did that happen? Like, good for them.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Like, well done. Good luck in your career and everything. But then you're like, what, how did that person get through? And the shock of, or like the disappointment of, like, okay, like you're gonna hear 1,000 no's, you're gonna hear a million no's, you're gonna hear so many no's, but like the shock of how blasé it is, of just like, you know it's interesting, especially as like writing, like as what I write. It's like, where do I fit? Like, do I go to a university press? Do I go to, like, who do I submit to that's actually going to respond? So the shock of it, I think, is just how hard you have to work behind the scenes beyond what, Not that that's shocking, because that's what that we've chosen this. We've
Right.
accepted that this is our lot. But like, how hard that you have to work behind the scenes to actually make something come true. It's not just like, hey, I wrote a book, like look at this. It's all rainbows and sunshine. It's not.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very true. And another aspect of the business side is, of course, understanding one's audience. And this goes back to the question of, the atmosphere, making sure that it is engaging. And as historians and authors, we have this tightrope dilemma where we want to be historically accurate, but we don't want to boggle down on the academic or historical jargon. We want to be engaging for our readers, but we also don't want to play down the reader. So ultimately, Briana, when you were writing this book, as well as writing your other books, how did you come to the realization of knowing who your audience is, as well as balancing your individuality as an author, but also realizing, the type of storytelling you're writing in that has certain expectations readers are looking for?
That's an awesome. Those are a lot of awesome questions. I think that through my writing, I just want to appeal to people's greater selves.
Hmm.
I want people to pick up a book, and like, there's obviously books that we read and they're like beach reads, and they're flippant, or they're fun, or they're playful. But then, I like the idea of picking up a book with the intention of really reading it. So
Yeah.
so when I write, that's, that's what I want. I want someone to sit down and be like, no, I want to read this. Like, I want to actually read it. So it's that idea of like, do you want to appeal to the masses? Absolutely. Do you want it to be like, a national bestseller, a New York Times bestseller? Sure. But like, I don't know. I think that my first book, when I wrote, I was like so hopeful, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to do it. And then my second one, and I was like, you know what? Now at this point, I'm like, I spent 3 years writing this book. I put my heart and soul into it, and whoever reads it, I'm so grateful for. And if it gets to a broader audience, so be it. Like, that's what I'm working for. So like you talked about like 2 or 3 questions ago, the
Mhm.
business side of it. What do I
Yeah.
wish I had done differently? What I'm doing with you now is
Mm,
networking.
yes.
Networking, touching base with people, having an idea of what other people are doing out there, and not like comparing yourself with other people, but like finding more. Like, I found more like-minded people on LinkedIn when it comes to writing and history than I ever sought out on Instagram.
That is
And,
true.
and so like, I think it's to find the people that are your people, or they're your people adjacent. Or, I wish that I had spent more time, instead of worrying that like that, but also like I was working full time too. I work full time too. So it's like, but I think that what I would have done differently is start networking, and not just say, okay, I have this beautiful book and people will read it. It's like, no, no, like you have to work night and day for it.
Yes, very true. Networking is something that is very important and something that I've come to realize as a vital tool for all independent creators, as well as historians too, which is very, very vital. And to tie that into it, this is actually, I'm going to combine a fan question and an old question I used to ask my guests. And context for this question. So before I graduated from my university in San Francisco many years ago, I had the opportunity to go to a seminar, and it was, of course, how to use your history degree in the world. And I think out of all the degrees, the liberal arts is probably the ones that get shafted in this regard. And if you run through the grain of the sand, so to speak, history is probably the one that you're only shown two paths. You're either going to be a teacher or you're going to work in the government one way or another. And of course, that works for some people, not a lot for the majority. And we have to carve our own path, that middle path. And that's where a lot of people that I've seen, and some that I believe you can agree, have struggled in trying to build their career. And in that seminar, there was an author. He was a nonfiction author, but he was able to use his degree in history and write. I was able to take that as my inspiration and create my career as an author as well as a magazine writer. So ultimately, Briana, here is the question slash fan question. Do you believe, in your opinion, that out of all the fields in academia, there should be a workshop slash seminar course for history students that help them realize how they could take their other talent, couple that with history, and build their career if they're going down that middle path.
Yes. Absolutely. I don't think we should blindly get these degrees even just because we love them and they matter to us and they mean something, you know? I think that there should be, like even like not to I listen, I went and got my master's degree and everything, and it was a school for creative careers. But even then, a there was not a clear path. Like nobody sat there and was like, you could call somebody, but like I was blatantly told, like, no, you probably shouldn't get your PhD. And I'm like, okay, well, what other options are there? Because I have to, like, if I, what I'm saying, I think that there should be an idea of, like you said, your other talents, your other skills. How do you put them all together? Like you said, you were lucky to take that seminar and meet with that man who guided you in the direction that you are now in.
Yes.
And I think that there needs to be not this like, it's amazing that people are still wanting to study this stuff. It makes me happy. I love when I meet up my fellow historians and people that are like, oh gosh, I like they nerd out on history. And it's like, well, what do you think about this? What do like it's exciting. It's awesome.
Very true.
Yeah, like it's like oh my god, like thank God, I need my nerds. Like listen, I need my nerds. I don't want to talk about Love Island. I don't. I'm sorry.
Very true. Very, very true. Now, before I get to the final two questions, there is a very important question, which I did forget to mention in the beginning, but I think it is important to talk about at least now for the business side. And that is, of course, well, actually, let me pull back a bit. I'm actually going to combine three questions into a big one. So brace yourself, Brianna.
Okay.
So we talked about a lot of things about the creating of the book as well as marketing the book. And it is very difficult. But I definitely think one that needs to be talked about is what happens when we are either stuck writing or what happens when we reach the end. So the first part of this very large fan question is, how do you handle the dreaded writer's block?
The what? No,
The
no, no, no,
right.
no, no. I just, I don't believe in writer's block. I think that like I was so lucky a few years ago. Listen, there's been times that like I would cry that I'm like I can't write. You know what I mean? But at the
Mhm.
other side of it, I wasn't writing. So it's not like I was.
Uh-huh.
It's not like I can't write. It's not that I wasn't writing. You know what I mean? So I don't know if you've ever read any newsletters or gone on Maria Popova's site.
I don't think so. No.
I'll send you a link to her. So basically like she takes like science and art and like artists and like children's book authors and stuff like that. And she writes these really rambunctious articles that just hook you in, that make you realize that writing is not, it's a practice. It's
Yes.
it's not inspirational. It's not anything like you like to say what you said before and to relate it to World War One. You are in the trenches.
Yes.
You are not, it's not writer's block. It's what are you doing in your life that is not gearing you in the direction of sitting down to write it? Like, are you breathing properly? Are you moving your body? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Like, I know if I don't sleep well, I don't write well.
Mm.
So like how do I prevent writer's block? I try to get 8 hours of sleep, and also like I give myself some leeway. If my heart doesn't feel like writing sometimes, like I don't sit there, like I'm not sitting there and be like, oh my God, I need to write 500 words today or 5,000 words. I feel like that's torturous, and writing shouldn't be, you shouldn't torture yourself entirely. You torture yourself all day long, but not to the extent of like that you are beating yourself up to the point where you can't do it.
Right. Absolutely. That is 100% very, very true. Now going forward, so beyond that, the another thing that is important is when to stop writing and making sure the ending is very, very sound and satisfying. Regardless of what genre that you're writing in or what style of writing, you want the final line or the passage to be satisfying for the reader because he did put a lot of time and investment into reading it. So for
Yes.
you, Brianna, when it came to writing this memoir on the Western Front, A, how did you know when to stop writing? And B, when writing that last line or that last passage, how did you make sure that it was going to be the most satisfying ending you've ever written?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, lucky for me, walking the Western Front, like I had a start, place and at an end place. So like it wasn't like it's not like I was like, oh yeah, and then I swam in the sea and swam up to the Arctic Circle. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it was I was able to say I have to end here because that's where it ended. So so where do you like the finding that satisfaction? I think that for like I said before, writing for me is an editorial process that I read and I rewrite and I rewrite and I rewrite. So like when I feel the flutter in my heart, when I feel like I created a sentence that someone will just sit there and like maybe they'll cry or maybe they'll just sigh or maybe they will just feel something more than they've ever felt. That's when I stop, because otherwise you're just listen, me out of anybody in the world, I love to beat a dead horse. I love to beat a dead horse. But when it comes to writing, I think that there is a time to let go.
Very true. And I think everyone needs to realize that as much as we can, should we, when it comes to writing. And I think that is sometimes a great piece of advice. And on that topic of advice, we now arrive at the final two questions of this amazing interview, Briana. With everything you've learned on your journey thus far as an author and an historian, what is your piece of advice to fellow writers as well as fellow historians wanting to pursue a career in either one or the other or a combination of both? And secondly, what do you want readers and historians to take away from this memoir?
Great questions. All right. So I don't think the best piece of advice is like marry someone rich so you can do it. But I mean, it might help. Or be rich yourself. Um, get ready to get your heart broken because it's history. Like get ready to get your heart broken in every aspect of it. Like learning the history and then being like, I need to reflect on it, and then being able to write on it, and then like you said before, you brought up imposter syndrome. Like,
Hmm.
what would you do? Just don't give up. Don't give up. Just if that's what your heart calls you to do, just do it and be true to it. Don't listen, the road is always going to go like this. It is always going to go back and forth, and there's always going to be bumps in it, and there's always going to be obstacles. But at the end of the day, if this is what your soul's calling is, then follow through on it, because the world needs more historians, the world needs more writers, the world needs we're witnessing firsthand what it means for the majority of people not to study humanities anymore.
Yes, that is a very, very, very terrifying thing. And ultimately, going back to again the second last question, what do you want readers to take away from this book, as well as fellow historians, from your memoir?
That foie gras is delicious. No, I'm kidding. What do I want people to take away? That the war never ended. You can sit there and say, oh, on November 11th, 1918, the guns of August fell silent. That's not true. So what do I want people to take away? That we need to walk through history. We need to walk through history. We need to wade through it. We need to get dirty, and we need to acknowledge our own part in it. And what better way to do that than to go visit these historic sites, talk to your friends about it, share the story, and be part of it, because that's we're the present is going to be the past one day.
Very beautifully said, Brianna. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Brianna for making her official debut here on the show. Now, Brianna, where can people find you on social media if they want to connect? And where can people buy copies of all three of your books?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram at Briana Gervat. Also, that the two-part question that you asked, the fan question,
Mhm.
if that fan wants to reach out to me, because I don't think I answered the question very well, like he or she can email me, because I feel like I didn't do that question very much justice. So I think it deserves it, because it was a good. They were great questions, and I feel like I got lost in like paying attention to the question, but knowing what I wanted to say. So I apologize. So yeah, at Briana Gervat on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn, where I found you.
Hmm.
And then my books are on Amazon right now, and I'm trying my hardest to get them in bookstores. And lucky for me, I've, like I said, all the writing the business aspect of it, I've now got into museums along the Western Front. So they can find me there.
Nice, nice. And as a final last little fan question, are there any shout outs you want to give to people that have helped you on your journey?
Oh my gosh, yes, my parents. My friend Alicia Colson, she's an archaeologist. She has been a steadfast supporter. Rory Forsyth, who developed the Western Front Way. There's a man named Cy Whaley, who is one of my first readers, who has done nothing but encourage and support me this whole entire time. And gosh, all my friends and family that are just like, you did it, you're doing it, like keep going. And so, like everybody that I talk to on a daily basis, I shout out to them, and my friend Jen. My friend Jen is so love. All my friends. I have three really good friends named Jen. So all of them.
Nice, nice. I'll link
And you,
all of
Gabriel.
them.
And thank you, because you were wonderful, and this was such a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, where to contact Brianna and where also buy copies of her books. And if you'd like to see Brianna again in an historian's interview, comment down below and I'll see to make it happen. And again, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing author interview here on the show. A huge thank you to Brianna for making her official debut on the channel. And as I said before, if you'd like to see her back on the show again in an historians only interview, comment down below and I will try to make that happen. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and again, subscribe to stay up to date with all new details. And until next time, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill, signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the next episode.